Hi everyone, it's a thrill to be here with so many people that I just love and admire and have been inspired by throughout my career. I apologize for coming late. We have 3 kids and my wife's in school, and so yesterday I was on pickup and drop off duty and stuff like that. So I'm really excited to share what we've learned in the last few years, and maybe you can help us think through where we're headed. This work began, I came to this work as a first-year grad student. Somehow Bill found me and picked me, and I was a know-nothing middle school teacher. And then I was able to come to Stanford and really learn and grow and blossom. And so I kind of owe everything to Bill starting me on this career. And also Matt Bundick, who's my co-author on the first paper I ever published, that was the foundation for this work. And when I published that, I thought, man, I just wish I could do an experiment where we take these ideas and try to promote more of so-and-so kind of thinking and then see if good things go up. And so we finally got to do some experiments. And then what I'm going to share is a little correlational data and then where the kind of experimental tradition has blossomed from this work. So here's my focus. It's a narrower focus than purpose in life. A primary claim that I guess is my guiding hypothesis that we have some data for is that a self-transcendent purpose for learning can be a reservoir of self-regulation that supports deeper learning behavior when adolescents have alternatives, as in when they could choose to not work on their academic content. So I'm not talking about all aspects of purpose in life. Many of you are far greater experts in those topics than I am. I'm also not talking about all motivation. I'm not talking about performance settings, for instance. And also not even all learning, right? So I'm not talking about surface learning, memorizing. I'm talking about what you might call deeper learning, which is the idea that you learn to retain information to use it later. And last, I'm really talking about the everyday behaviors you do in like a free choice setting when you could do something else, when you choose to deeply learn on your own or in a group, okay? And I think this is not everything, but I think it's an important subset of motivation and behavior that can give us some purchase on some meaningful outcomes. So a lot of my work comes from my time as a mediocre middle school teacher, where I felt like I was pretty good at getting like 7th graders fired up to learn, right? I could come up with a good project, have a good social justice theme. So I taught in Tulsa, Oklahoma, down the street from the actual drive-in where The Outsiders was filmed and actually occurred. So Essie Hinton is from Tulsa, she's writing about Tulsa. And so I could get my middle schoolers to talk about social justice and conflict and aggression, and we'd walk to the drive-in and say, this is where everyone got stabbed in the book. And but then once I had them fired up, I was not very good at giving them like meaningful grammar content to learn from. So when I started grad school, I really thought, how can I give more teachers like me better advice on how to motivate young people? And some of those, my research questions were guided by a couple observations and intuitions from my time in the classroom. And so one is that in our own careers, think about what we do, and also the things that I had learned to do in my life. Some learning is fun and thrilling. A lot of it is not. Sometimes it's only ambiguously relevant, but it's not always clear why you need to use content later. You kind of have to trust that the assignment a teacher has given you is going to be useful for something. So there's a kind of a relationship of trust that we have. Relevance isn't always immediately apparent. The second is that, at least when I was the source of these arguments, kind of short-term or even long-term self-interested arguments didn't seem to motivate at least the students I was teaching, to choose to work hard and learn of their own free will when they had alternatives. So for instance, factoring trinomials is a rite of passage in America. As Uri Treisman likes to say, we started with algebra for everyone, and we ended up with algebra forever, because people don't learn to factor in 9th grade, and then they end up taking remedial math for years and years and years in America. He also says, we're the only country in the first world that still teaches factoring. It's actually, as he says, the only equations that can be factored are the ones in your algebra textbook. And so and actually, the little side note is, I started just sitting in on his freshman calculus class. I'm just like doing a little amateur ethnography of a teacher who gets purpose right every day in his class. And that's a direct quote from Ernie Treisman the other day to his freshman calculus students. And so you kind of have to take it on faith that somehow the mental gymnastics you do to learn this routine will eventually have some kind of relevance later. But it's definitely not fun to do this. Okay, but last, that there are other motives that are right under the surface that we often ignore, but that are really powerful. For instance, the observation that the world is unfair and unjust felt to me, at least, as a teacher, the easiest thing in the world to get 8th graders to say. That something was unfair, that adults were maybe hypocritical or taking advantage of them. And often it felt like we work against that. We try to suppress that. We say, don't think about how it's unfair, think about how you need to do this. But what if we could flip that? What if we could use this readiness to observe unfairness and injustice and then align it with things that are in young people's long-term self-interest? And so when I read the work of many of the people in the room, that's what resonated with me most, was the idea that if you add this self-transcendent beyond the self component, you tap into this kind of developmentally cued desire and maybe even need to see injustices and unfairness in the world and to be motivated to do something about them, or at least be aligned with something that's doing something about them. And so my kind of modification of Bill and others' definition, narrowly focused on purpose for learning, is the idea that you work hard and learn in school to gain skills that you can use to have a positive effect on the world around you and also have an enjoyable and fulfilling life. The idea isn't to ask young people to be martyrs, but to find something that's personally meaningful that they identify with, but that they could reasonably construe as having an impact on the world beyond the self. And in some work that Matt and I had done using the first purpose data set, we found that young people who endorsed both the self-oriented and the beyond the self felt like their homework and their work in school and even their life was the most meaningful. Okay. So I think there's purpose can do a little magic trick on schoolwork. So just take the extreme case of factoring trinomials. You could imagine, not all kids, but some kids saying, this is pointless, uninteresting, an unfair imposition on my ability to make my own choices, some kind of controlling, kind of authoritarian regime. And then the argument might be that it's only good for your long-term benefit, like taking your medicine. And from that perspective, the task itself may not be construed as meaningful for some young people. But maybe something else, being an environmental engineer that allows me to do something about the environment, about the world, maybe I'm going to have a meaningful role in adult society. Seems kind of interesting to learn about how things are connected. I can address the injustice of the destruction of the environment. I'm getting to choose this route. Perhaps under those conditions, learning, doing factoring, trinomials, etc., maybe this is meaningful for me. This is a kind of hypothesis, a stylized story, but I want to look at individual differences and then experiments that try to create more of this perception and see if it makes young people see work as more meaningful and then in turn creates a desire to deeply work. All right, so the first is just a little correlational study. This was done in a number of urban public charter schools. We surveyed outgoing seniors, and it's a part of a broader study of college persistence. And some of the schools were 90% of students were African American students. Others of the schools, 90% of students were Latino. So these are high-performing, urban, predominantly minority-serving charters. And we measured motives for why people would want to learn and grow in college and high school and beyond. And then we measured some potential correlates. So one were what you might call skills-focused, self-transcendent motives. I want to gain skills I can use in a job that helps others. I want to learn things that will help me make a positive impact on the world. Others were skills-focused, self-oriented. I want to expand my knowledge of the world. I want to explore my personal interests. This is the kind of independent self items that you might see in cultural psychology. And then kind of more outcome focused or extrinsic. motives like I want to earn money, I want to get out of the house, have my own freedom. All right. Then what we did is we thought, could you construe everyday tasks on a more meaningful level if your motivation is to use the skills you would gain from those tasks to make some kind of pro-social difference? That is, might you see the task itself as having different meaning? And for this, we borrow from the behavioral identification theory and construal level theory, and we look at whether people observe photographs of everyday tasks, like doing your math homework, and then describe it more in terms of its high-level association with goals, like building your problem skills, or in terms of the low-level concrete procedures that you might go through. Typing numbers into a calculator and writing formulas. Another one is attending math class. Is this improving your ability to think critically about numbers, or is this copying notes off the board in the math class? There's no right answer, obviously. It's how young people are seeming to chronically construe everyday tasks in a meaningful way or in a concrete way. We also measure Angela Duckworth's individual difference measures of grit and self-control with the prediction that seeing everyday work as more meaningful might allow people to exhibit greater self-regulation. This is not a structural model. These are circles with regression coefficients, and we're not trying to make a kind of causal claims with these. First, what we find is that sure, young people who say they want to learn in order to have an interesting and enjoyable life, because they want to be an educated person, they're more likely to show grit, more likely to show self-control, more likely to choose higher level meaningful descriptions of everyday objects. All of these coefficients are positive and significant. In addition though, what we find is that these kind of self-transcendent motives in the same regression also significantly predict grit, self-control, and more choices of higher order meaningful descriptions of everyday objects. And that's true controlling for these other types of motives, and then in a walled test we find that in each case these coefficients are greater for this predictor than these. And last, what we find is that net of these other motives, this kind of get a job, make money, negatively predicts grit, negatively predicts self-control, negatively predicts the meaningfulness of your academic work. Just an initial correlational study kind of gives us a first kind of purchase on these ideas. Okay, next is to go to an experiment. If you could believe this, then the idea would be to try to promote more of this construal of academic work. So how do we do this? For this, what we decided to do was to turn to a growing tradition of what you might call wise psychological interventions. Wise isn't the opposite of unwise. Wise simply means that it tries to start with a subjective perspective of a person, whatever they might be facing or thinking, and try to align some kind of positive behavior with their construals. In the way that social psychology has helped us to do this there's a few different things we've learned. So one thing we've learned from Chris Holloman's research is that it can be more effective sometimes to ask people to tell us why something is relevant, rather than to tell them why the coursework is relevant. So in their wonderful paper in the journal Science, what they found is that asking high school science students to say, hey, here's the topic for the week, how could this be relevant to you or someone you care about? That was more effective at creating interest than saying, here's the topic for the week, if you know this, you can do this kind of job, you can learn about this kind of thing later. And in many cases, the things young people wrote were not that plausible of how it could be relevant. But what mattered was that they personally had generated those ideas. And then the next one was to really try to elicit the social justice issues that might be under the surface. Again, to not tell young people, you have to be mad about this cause, about Syria, about politics, about the economy. To say, instead, lots of young people tell us there are things that they think could be better about the world. Not just for themselves, but for others. What are some things that you really think about that you wish were better and that someone like you might be able to do something about one day? And they can write something or not. About 80% of kids write something. Interestingly, they're almost never local issues except in really high poverty contexts, what we find. Usually they're kind of global issues. And then what we do is to try to connect this social justice issue with the reason why you might want to know something. We say the hardest problems in the world to solve aren't easy. And that means that if someone's going to do something about it, they have to know something. How do you know something? You gain skills. School's an opportunity to do that. And then last, we draw on this wise psychological intervention tradition where we don't tell, we ask. We say, next year's students are not going to know that if they learn deeply, they can do something to improve the world. Would you mind writing them a letter explaining how this could be true for them? So students are not beneficiaries of the intervention, they're benefactors in many cases. So there's a kind of a purpose to even completing the intervention to begin with, you could say. Here's the kind of most recent engineered version. We realized that we should not have been doing graphic design all along, that we're lame. So we started paying people to do our graphic design. And so, so the basic idea is your brain learns when you work hard on writing and math assignments and gain writing and math skills you can use in your future, and this helps you make a difference for your family, community, and the world around you. This is the version we wrote for 7th and 8th graders. We had another version that kind of worked for high schoolers, I'll show you. When we took that one to 7th and 8th graders, it just assumed too much. The idea that you learn and gain skills, actually young people told us they didn't understand that basic link. So now our control group has all of this stuff. Your brain learns when you work hard and then gain skills. The control group gets all that. All we add in the treatment group, in addition to this learning orientation, is just that, and then you can make a difference in the world. And then my friend, my collaborator, my second author on our paper, Marlone, agreed to let me attribute this to him so that way we could be accurate. And then he recorded this himself saying this. One of the most amazing facts about human learning is you're building skills even when you don't realize it, as long as you're working hard on your assignments. People do work in school like literary analysis, writing assignments, or math problems. They don't always see how they're going to use it later. May even feel boring to do all the little steps, like actually look up the words in the dictionary. But if you do the unfun parts of learning, your brain is getting prepared. It's learning skills you can use in lots of ways, in jobs that need a degree or jobs that don't. Later, when you want to do something important, that skill is there waiting for you. And then we learned about Roberto. This is an anecdote we got from our piloting with these kids in this study. Roberto was in 8th grade in Houston last year. He did his work in English language arts, but he didn't always see the point. One day he started looking at the news with his family. He saw bad things that were going on around the country. He was so angry because it was so unfair. Roberto and his mom went one time to a group at the community center so they could speak out. The group was writing letters to the government and to other families. One of the leaders asked Roberto if he could add something. He was excited. As he wrote his thoughts, he realized he was glad he'd learned how to write persuasively. So the idea is to say you can connect doing something about social justice now with the skills you learn in school. And you never know when they're going to come in handy. And we're trying to back teens off the argument of, if I learn this, I'll use it here, and I'll use it there, and I'll use it there, but instead create a little space for the ambiguity of how you might use the skills you're learning. And have faith that you can use them to help others one day. And then you read quotes from upperclassmen. These are all teens who took previous kind of crappier versions of our treatment, and then we use their letters over time, and we continually edit those. So we make these quotes from upperclassmen better every year. And then at the end, it's like, your turn, why isn't learning important to your goals? And then how could you help people? And they get the reminder of this. So we look at this in a lot of ways. I'm just going to show you the immediate psychological benefits first, and then we'll show you more data later. The first thing is, does that make schoolwork in general feel more meaningful? One way we test that is a month after this, we come back and we give a survey and we say, by the way, how meaningful is your schoolwork? And what we find is that the skills-only intervention, they say school is about a 3.6 on a 7-point scale, and then there's a modest but significant increase a month later in the purpose treatment of saying that schoolwork is meaningful. Something that's a little bit unexpected, but we think is kind of cool, is something we're kind of now calling the Karate Kid effect. So if you remember Karate Kid, so I'm a child of the 80s, so I remember it vividly. Mr. Miyagi's like, paint the fence, wax the car. And he doesn't give him any reason at all. And he's like, come on, I'm in ninja school. Why am I painting the fence? Like, this is the worst. I'm like, I'm trying to learn how to like impress this girl and not get beat up by the other ninjas. And eventually though, Mr. Miyagi like attacks him and he realized, oh, I've been blocking, learning how to block, kicks and punches all along. And so there's this kind of idea that sometimes you learn, but you just have to trust that the teacher is giving you meaningful work that eventually will turn into a useful skill for you later. And so one question is, if you have this view that there's a purpose for learning, might you begin to start developing a trust of your teacher's rationale for the schoolwork? And that's kind of what we start finding, is that the treatment increases the perception modestly that the teacher cares about your purpose in life. I didn't tell you, these are 7th and 8th grade students at one of the lowest income schools in Houston, actually A-Leaf School District. Overall trust in school goes up a month later, and then also these kind of Mike Steger overall meaningfulness of life items also go up about a month later on the street. It's about almost 300 kids. And all of these, of course, are double-blind designs. We do the treatment in the school computer lab. Kids just go to the lab, and then the computer brings them through different self-guided exercises. So that's like attitudinal stuff. Now let's look at behavior and self-regulation. About the same time as we launched that survey, and that Angela Duckworth was a collaborator, we realized we didn't have good outcome measures to assess a lot of the self-regulation constructs. So we have agree-disagree items that measure individual differences. We don't have great performance tasks that might be responsive to treatments. And there are problems with using agree-disagree items as outcomes when you're reporting on a trait. For instance, if you have a higher standard, you might change the reference group that you apply when answering those questions. So what we needed was a behavioral task. And Angela and her colleague Sydney DeMello came up with this idea of kind of like a web-based marshmallow test. And you can either do math that you think will make your brain stronger, and we give them a cover story about strengthening your brain, or if you want, you can do whatever you want. You can goof off and watch like LeBron James dunk, or watch other awesome YouTube videos like Carly Rae Jepsen, like Call Me Maybe, was actually in our study. And the math is intentionally easy so that you don't get that positive feedback of getting problems right and kind of get in that loop. It's meant to be, it's artificial in the sense that it's meant to isolate the experience of doing something only that's tedious, but that you believe could plausibly be related to skill development, but that's directly competing with something more fun and awesome. I don't know if this will work. I can't get the video to work. But so you log in, you click, and secretly on the back end, it tracks how many math problems you do and then how many awesome YouTube videos you watch. Okay? And it's very clearly a free choice, and kids have no problem doing only goofing off. So here's what we find. We did a version of that purpose treatment I just showed you. This is with 18-year-olds at UT. And what our prediction is that the more you do the task, the less math you do. The more you get bored, the more you quit. And also, the more you do it, the more you goof off. And that's what we find in the control condition. So kids did 67 problems in the first trial and then 37 problems in the next trial. So you see almost half reduction. And then there's also in the control an increase in the number of tempting videos watched from 1.2 over the 3-minute trial to 1.6. This is about what you expect, and they replicate the same trial over trial finding in other studies. For the purpose treatment, though, what we find is that it just stems the decline. It doesn't make kids want to do more boring math. It's just as it gets more and more unpleasant and boring, they quit less. And so you see a difference in significant difference in the differences between these two lines, and then also a simple effect within this trial. And then you see the same result here, where especially at trial 2, you see a significant difference between the purpose students here and then the control students here. We did another version of the study where there was that whole purpose treatment, except it talked about your personal payoff for learning. So it was only long-term self-interested. And there we see it kind of in the middle. So it ends up about right there. and then about right there. All right, so that same treatment we tried on a kind of a one-shot intervention with ninth graders in Silicon Valley, about 450 kids, I think. So kids in January or February go to the computer lab, they complete the purpose treatment or a control that's very neutral, and then from their perspective, the study's over. But then we collect their grades at the end of the term, and we look at whether there are differences in their overall GPA, especially their STEM course GPA, math and science. And what we find is that for all students, there's a small but significant increase in STEM course GPA at the end of the term. For students who completed the one-time purpose for learning treatment, it's about 0.1 grade points. So this is a small but meaningful effect, we think. For students who started, who prior to the treatment had a low GPA, for instance, this is just, we're looking at a simple effect, but it's a full linear interaction with prior achievement. You see a boost of about 0.2 grade points. So this was the first time we tested this with about 400 students. Dave Pinescu published a replication of this effect in Psych Science in 2015. And so our story here, coming out of what I showed you so far, is that the purpose treatment helps young people see everyday academic assignments as perhaps more meaningfully related to a future they want to be in. They might trust teachers more, and they might be willing to display greater grit and self-control and self-regulation, even if the work doesn't feel immediately relevant and obvious, and even if it doesn't feel immediately interesting. In a new project, what we're doing is something we're calling the National Study of Learning Mindsets. The idea here is to combine the purpose treatment with a more well-established growth mindset of intelligence treatment. So as a reminder, the growth mindset of intelligence treatment teaches young people that when school is hard, it doesn't mean you're dumb. It means your brain is growing and learning. So this is a brain exercising. However, what we found in some piloting is that a lot of young people get this treatment and they say, well, sure, I can learn, but why should I? What's the point of it? And so combining the idea that you can learn with the idea that if you learn, you can make a difference for others in the world, we think could be helpful. In a bunch of initial trials, this felt like a weird sandwich. You know, it was like you take your favorite breakfast and your favorite lunch and put it together in the same meal. It doesn't taste good. And so we actually spent a lot of time doing piloting and prototyping to weave these two things together. And we spent about 2 years doing kind of user-centered design based on IDEO, kind of rapid prototyping ideas. We ran rapid A/B test randomized experiments, like 18 condition studies on MTurk, trying to combine purpose in the mindset. And then we also just obsessively rewrote it. And when I say we, I mean Carol and I for about 2 years. And the way Carol Dweck characterizes this process is she says, David, now that we're not rewriting that treatment, our relationship is so great. So it was like, I don't recommend this necessarily, do this with your best friends. So how do you evaluate this? Well, the National Mindset Study is delivering this version of the treatment to a national random sample of 76 U.S. public high schools. So we sampled those schools from a sampling frame of 138, and then within those schools, 95% of students complete the treatment at session 1 and are randomized to condition. So within schools, very high response rates. At the school level, pretty good response rates given national surveys, about 56%. And what we can do is look at earlier versions here compared to the final version. And we don't yet have grades for the national study. They're kind of coming in slowly. Data collection ended in February, so grades have to come in from the districts and get merged and cleaned. But what we do have is immediate proxy outcomes, where you can look at changes in behavior in the very short term to see if we've created a desire to learn. And what we did is we kind of invented a desire for learning behavioral task. We call it the make a worksheet task. And the logic is the following. We have kids at the end of a very long survey we tell them, hey, and at the end of this, you're going to get to do a math worksheet, which they don't love. And then It's like, but you get to pick which problems you get to do. And some of these problems, we tell them, are easy. You'll get it right. But you won't learn anything new because you already know it. Some of these problems are really hard. But you might learn something new because you don't know it. What would you like? And they have a menu. They have 4 different chapters they go through, and they choose either challenging or easy problems. And we sum those up. And what we're going to do is compare older versions of the growth mindset treatment to the one that involves mindset and purpose together, and look at whether you can increase the rate at which kids choose the hard problem of their own free will when there's no reward or consequence for doing otherwise. On the y-axis, what I'm going to show you means that they're choosing more hard problems than easy. There could be up to 8 hard problems, up to 8 easy problems. So if they chose 8 and 7, that would be more hard than easy. The below 0 would be more easy than hard. This means avoiding challenges. And what you find is the first generation is only growth mindset. Second generation is the like sandwich you don't want to eat version of growth mindset and purpose. And this is our final version. And what we find is that here, kids are choosing 1.5 more easy problems than hard, even though they're getting a growth mindset treatment. Here, they're choosing 0.8 more easy problems than hard. And what we find here is that, at least statistically, they're choosing about as many easy problems as hard of their own free will. Now, is this GPA? Will this translate into failure rates? We don't know. This is just moments after the survey. Are we doing a better job at changing choices when we've integrated growth mindset and purpose? But this is 28,000 kids across these studies. We're really excited about these results because it suggests that at scale, with a random sample of U.S. high schools, 95% of kids in those high schools, we can integrate growth mindset and purpose and deliver treatments to young people that work better than anything we've done before. What's really motivated me recently, though, is not can we just give a jolt of a purpose? And I'll be honest, the reason I started with the jolt studies was because in schools, purpose was totally discredited. People said it's a nice to have, not a need to have. And my rhetorical strategy was to say it's not just a nice to have, it's a need to have right away, and it differentially benefits disengaged and disenfranchised students, and it treats them with respect and makes them like their teachers more. And with that argument, it becomes much easier to talk about the overall concept of purpose. And then what happens is people say, but yeah, your little online activity, what can that do? And we're like, yeah, it's like different from zero, but only psychologists care about something being different from zero, right? The null hypothesis. A lot of people really care, doesn't matter enough to do something consequential. So with the support of the Rakes Foundation, they funded a study where what we wanted to do was combine that online treatment to see if it sets the ground, and then what could a teacher say in a classroom to reinforce the purpose that a student might have? Could they say something? Now, if you're going to do that kind of study where you're manipulating something about the classroom experimentally, obviously there are lots of logistical problems, right? If you're training teachers, then you need an enormous sample size, right? And you have all kinds of nesting problems, and you have to be really confident in what you're training teachers on. And I wasn't confident at all in my ability to predict which phrases and sentences were going to work. So what we decided instead was to do a kind of compromise study where we are manipulating something about what the teacher says, but we're manipulating it within classes so you get better statistical power. And the way we do that is through a post-it note paradigm that Jeff Cohen developed a few years ago. And I'll show you how that looks. But first, let's look at the conditions. We spent 1.5 years doing pilots and focus groups with 7th and 8th graders to figure out what could a teacher say that supports your purpose in school. Like what sentence would work? We had a bunch of randomized studies where we tried a bunch of things and said, hypothetically, if your teacher said this, would you try harder on your math assignment? And we found some things that didn't work, some things that did work. Here's what we ended up with for our purpose treatment. It's a mouthful, so I don't love it from that perspective. But one young girl, an A-Leaf, which is very low-income middle school, she read this and she was like, okay, this means my teacher's got my back. And so I heard a few kids say that, and then I was like, all right, we're going to try this. So here's what it is. I'm giving you this assignment because I think you have the potential to get an interesting job and make people's lives better one day if you develop your skills on assignments like this one. And it feels kind of, it doesn't immediately jump out as remarkable. What the kids told us they liked about it was that it doesn't say this assignment will make a difference for your life, because that argument wasn't credible. Like, this worksheet really was kind of what seventh graders told us. So we have on assignments like this one. When these types of notes said you're going to get money one day, we might think, okay, that adults say that all the time. Kids hear that and think, this adult thinks I'm poor. And so then it had the potential to be insulting to kids. So we didn't even use the make money one day quote. If we said make a difference, they're like, well, what if it's a bad difference? And, you know, if you say fulfilling job, like, what does that mean? So we kind of like each word in here is kind of, and we're also, remember, we're going in the backdrop against what Deb Stipek found years ago. The teachers almost never explain the rationales for tests that they hand out, right? The most common rationale is because it's on the test. And so any explanation is probably better than none. And then we think this explanation can do better than the controls. So in the controls, we systematically removed pieces of these. So one control is self-oriented plus skills. I'm giving you this assignment because I think you have the potential to get an interesting job one day if you develop your skills on assignments like this one. So it's learning-oriented, it's kind of self-interested, but it's long-term self-interested, it's not immediate self-interested. So we actually thought this was going to be a tiny effect. The punchline is all of these look the same. There's no difference between these three. Another one was skills only. I'm giving you this worksheet because I think it can help you practice your skills. We were even worried about this because it could imply that the teacher thinks you're no good. And so there were other versions that were skill and learning focused, where the kid like read between the line. Wait, I need to learn because you think I'm dumb? So we tried to worry about that. And then I'm giving you this worksheet because it's the next activity in the lesson plan, right? Which is just a placebo explanation. All right. So what's the actual assignment? The assignment was a test prep writing exercise. And we tried to pick a topic that was what we'd call ambiguously relevant. Like, if you really squint, you could see something personally relevant. But at first blush, you might not say, oh yeah, my life purpose is to work hard on this worksheet. So and we had to pick different ones for 7th and 8th graders because they're at different levels. The 7th grade one was a nonfiction piece about the community of Pilsen in Chicago and about changes in immigration patterns there over time. What's nice about it is these were 80% Latino students. So Pilsen has more recently become a Latino immigrant community, but in its history, it was like Polish immigrants and stuff. So there's a lot that could happen and could plausibly be personally relevant, but it's not clear if they would see it. Then what kids did is they plan out their writing plan and then they write it. And we were trying to add boring but helpful things you could do. You should define your vocab words here. You should outline your answers. And so we're not done coding this, but we're looking at the quality of the preparation too. Kind of the equivalent of, do you check your work at the back of the book and then fix your way of working through your problems or not? But what I'm going to show you now is just the official state test scoring from 0 to 4 for this that teachers allocated. The way this study works, though, is teachers 2 weeks before hand wrote a huge stack of all of these notes. So it's all the 7th grade teachers and all the 8th grade teachers in English. And we actually added in some fake notes too, so that they didn't know what was our hypothesis, and we had to pay them a lot of money because they're writing twice as many notes as there are kids, but we didn't want them to catch wind of this allocation and then think that this was the key message. So the day before the assignment, teachers, we printed these out. Teachers, we appended the handwritten notes randomly assigned on the kids' essays, put them in envelopes, put kids' names on the envelopes, and then teachers handed out the assignments in class, and kids worked privately in like little testing booths in the classroom and worked quietly and privately for 30 minutes. And then they put the things back in the folder and handed them back in. We dropped it all off the night before at like 8 p.m. so that the kids we did consent like months before. And so the kids never associated this with us as researchers. Okay, here's what we find is that on the x-axis, this is the online these are not showing up. On the x-axis is the online condition. The blue is the control notes, and the orange is the purpose post-it note. So this is control note, purpose note, control note, purpose note. This is control online intervention, and this is purpose online intervention. What we see is that for this assignment, the note only makes a difference if kids had first reflected on their own purposes. If a teacher kind of comes out of nowhere and says, you're going to make a difference, but the kids never, presumably, engaged in personal reflection on what their social justice issues might be, what concerns them, how it could relate to skill building, then there's no benefit of a teacher kind of bringing that to the fore. When the kids did do that reflection, then what we see is a significant difference. What we predicted was that all of the bars would be the same, and then this bar would be higher than all the rest. What we see instead is a non-significant decrease here, and then a significant difference here, but these are the data. So, but at least to me, what it suggests is that there's an interaction between the mindset that the kid develops, perhaps through our treatments, and then there's the reality that they experience in the classroom. Another interesting thing is that the kind of more self-oriented notes didn't seem to distinguish things very much. What I want to end with is kind of where we've taken this to other domains outside of kind of a purpose for learning. There are other things that are that young people contend with where there's a choice between something that's less pleasant maybe and something that's more immediately pleasurable. And could a purpose relate to self-regulation and self-control in those other domains as well? Healthy eating, we think, is one of those. And we think it's ripe for a purpose reframing, in part because in a bunch of our focus groups, what we find is that the default construal of healthy eating is that healthy eaters are lame nerds who do what adults tell them to do. And so the more health information we give them and the more food pyramids we give them, perhaps the more they say, this is more of me being a lame nerd who's doing what adults tell me. And it turns out, though, that this is like a construction of like the food industry. Because they're, well, first of all, eating healthy makes you feel great, and fresh food is amazing if you can have access to it. But also the food industry really kind of creates a really appealing marketing campaign, but they also make food physiologically pretty addictive in a lot of ways. And so our idea is to change the construal of healthy behavior so it's not seen as kind of uncool and doing what your parents tell you, but instead as autonomous, which you choose to do, and fighting back against injustice. And if you can do that, then perhaps you could change the social status appeal of the behavior and feel like it's something you can afford to do publicly in the eyes of people you admire. And once you privately, independently hold that view that this is something that makes me be more of the kind of person I'd like to be, then what you might see is free will choices that are more in line with that internalized value. So when you have the opportunity to behave otherwise, and there's no consequences one way or the other, you might be more likely to make the healthy choice. So we're going for what we think is like the hardest type of behavior change. Not behavior change where we can control the environment, like in a nudge situation, but the kind of internalized behavior in a free choice setting. So the way we tried to redefine healthy eating is to talk about autonomy. So framing the intervention as an exposé of manipulative food marketing practices. So healthy eating as a way to stick it to the man. And then we made it pro-social. So emphasize the social justice consequences of food marketing. Healthy eating is a way to stand up for people in need. We talk about how children, especially children in poor neighborhoods, are affected by the food companies' practices. So the goal is to reframe healthy eating from healthy eaters are lame nerds who do what adults tell them to do to healthy eaters are independent-minded people who are fighting to make the world a fairer place, which maybe is something kids can afford to say about themselves publicly in front of their peers. So what does the exposé look like? It's Food in America, the true story. We take only accurate journalistic accounts, so there's no deception in this study or in any of the other studies I've shown you. And so Michael Moss has a great book, Sugar, Fat, Salt, and there are other really good books about the food industry's practices. And we just tell teens these facts. What food companies do behind our backs, how teens can take a stand to make the world a better place. If companies just let you choose what you and your body wanted to eat, they would make a lot less money. So food company executives get rich by coming up with new ways to trick our brains into eating more than our bodies want. The most unfair part is that addictive, unhealthy foods hurt children and poor people the most, the people who have the least ability to defend themselves. Then they learn specific concrete examples about how food companies fill their foods with sugar. We tell them about the amazing history of hot Cheetos, which I don't know if you guys know about, but hot Cheetos are super engineered to be addictive. So there's the optimal amount of cheese that covers the tongue with saltiness. The rate at which the Cheeto melts on the tongue avoids your brain's natural satiety mechanism from kicking in, so that your brain doesn't know in some sense that it's eaten anything, but then the residue on the tongue kind of makes you want to have more, and the crunchiness provides the satisfying result. But then they added tons of hot sauce to it too, so that increases your salivation more, which makes you want to put more salty stuff on your tongue. And they did this. This wasn't theory driven either. They paid lots of scientists and lots of labs to do the 100-cell design of all possible ways, and then had a bunch of kids come in and figured out which kids couldn't stop eating the whole bag. And then that's what they're we're going with that one. And so that's almost all of these foods. And then so we tell them that, and then we say, then they have clowns come sell it to 4-year-olds. Then we talk about former tobacco executives that got hired by these companies to market it to kids. We didn't find any 8th graders in our study who were I want to be that guy. And so we kind of create this we accurately tell them. It turns out both of these guys don't let their children and grandchildren eat their own foods because they think it's too unhealthy. So pointing out hypocrisy is another part of teenage rebellion. And then you read quotes, learn what other students think. We piloted this in a bunch of sites, and then we used those quotes for the real intervention. Last year, 9th grade students from the Comal School District answered questions about how they felt about companies targeting teens. Young kids in the poor get them hooked on junk foods. Almost all 9th graders said their friends were shocked and angry about what the food companies are doing. Almost all 9th graders said their friends plan to fight back against the companies by buying and eating less of their processed foods. Then we'd have them engage in self-persuasion, like I mentioned, a wise intervention tactic. A lot of people tell us they're outraged and upset when they read about what the food companies are doing. Why do you think so many people feel that way? If you'd like to add any of your own personal responses, that would be great too. Please write 3 to 5 sentences. A lot of students tell us because they're outraged and upset, they want to take immediate action starting today. What kinds of food choices do you think students like you could make to fight back against the food companies? It'd be helpful if you could brainstorm some ideas that future students like you might want to use. Please write 3 to 5 sentences. Critically, we don't come to the classroom saying you need to know this. We say, we're lame adults who make textbook and other types of information or curriculum for students. And we want to give you the chance to give us feedback before we share with other people. And so they see themselves as kind of beta testers giving good feedback rather than as unknowledgeable neophytes receiving our wisdom. The control article we unfortunately took from Michelle Obama's wonderful campaign to promote healthy eating. So it's just lots of really great healthy information, very appealing visual images of fruits and vegetables and stuff. They learn about Choose My Plate, and then they read quotes from nutrition educators, moms, and teachers who say you should definitely eat healthy. We did the study 2 years in a row. The first year had a huge effect, so we tried to replicate the next year to make sure the effect was stable. First what we find is that we measured eating as a healthy way to stand up to people who are trying to control us. When I eat healthy, I feel like I'm taking control of my food choices. We find, and then when I eat healthy, I'm doing my part to protect kids. By not buying products from junk food companies, I'm helping others in need. And then what we find is a significant increase in those, which is obvious you should do that, but that's nice we did find that. And then, the PDF's not showing up very well. But then what we find, well, the key dependent variable is the next day, the principal gets on the loudspeaker and says, hey guys, great job with state testing. I'd like to reward everyone with a snack pack. Someone's going to come in your homerooms, and there's going to be a menu, and you can pick whatever you like. So the principal had been talking it up. His name was Fred, and he's the last author on the paper. He's the Steubing in the paper. And Fred's hilarious, by the way. Oh, sorry, I'm almost out of time. And he'd been talking it up, saying, you guys are going to do great. And so it just happened to fall on the day after the treatment. And it's done in a different class because we never did the treatment in homeroom. Okay, so it's as disconnected as we could make it. And then they could choose up to 2 snacks and up to 1 drink, and we count the number of unhealthy snacks. Here's the number of carbohydrates consumed the next day. We have a lot of different results. What we see is about a 9% reduction in grams of sugar consumed, or carbohydrates. We think this is kind of conservative because a lot of fruits have carbohydrates, but they're not added sugars, right? So nuts, for instance, have carbohydrates. So this is really exciting to us. We think it's a nice start. We're excited kind of about the mediation model too, that the treatment changes healthy eating, so it's pro-social and autonomous, that creates a social status appeal, which in turn predicts less junk food consumption the next day. So I'll end there. That's kind of the journey we've been on, and we're kind of going into a lot of new directions, and I'd love, whenever we get to the general discussion, all of your questions so we can make this work better. Thank you very much.
If anybody has any, we usually take 1 or 2 clarifying questions.
Sure.
Todd has to set up his computer, so we have a minute.
Okay, great. So clarifying questions.
How widespread are these large experimental designs?
Like how many people?
Are they well regarded in social psychology? I love your use of them. But
I think that for a long
I
time.
hadn't heard them before.
Yeah. Greg Walton has a nice review paper in Current Directions in 2014. He and I wrote a paper in 2011 called Psychological Interventions in Education, They're Not Magic. I think they're gaining in use, but then like anything, they're going to gain in misuse. So I think the meta-analyses look awesome now, and they'll look worse in a few years, because I think as you test something more heterogeneously, you'll see more mixed effects and more misapplications. But I think people are excited about the promise, but still curious about mechanisms, is my assessment. Yeah.
Do you have any plans to do longer-term follow-ups for lag effects or longer-term effects or anything like that?
I didn't show the community college studies we've done where we combined growth mindset and purpose. We're finding effects 2 years later on degree attainment. And there we're working with a whole system at Ivy Tech in Indiana. And so we can track them through administrative data for as long as we want. That's the one where we do, usually for the school studies, within 1 year you have no attrition. After 1 year, you get most marginal students transfer. So I often just don't, I usually plan for the 9-month studies. Let's see. Healthy, yeah.
If you can get those data, I think that would be especially interesting.
Yeah. Well, what I'd love to do is, could a purpose in a really narrow area translate into a general life purpose later? Yeah. You know, how does one social justice issue maybe provide a spark that then creates an orbit, you know? And so the only other thing we're doing is Sibel Raver added the purpose treatment to her Chicago school readiness. So she's been studying these kids since age 3 or something. So they're going to follow up with those kids. It's like 400 kids in Chicago. But yeah, I would love to maybe design that kind of longitudinal study from scratch. I just always worry about attrition and recontact rates.
It's tough. That's the tough part.
Yeah.
But even if you get some attrition, the data you can still use a lot of the data. You can find ways to compensate for the kids that dropped out.
Right.
So.
Yeah.
One of the things that came up yesterday, I think, for me, Bill, was that the biggest bump in purpose seems to be happening between 20 and 30. And I'm curious about any plans to use this kind of intervention in university or grad school or early workforce kinds of experiences?
Yeah. We have not done transition to 4-year because our treatment feels too similar to college essays that they write that then come across us. And so the treatment responses we get are trite a lot of times. For community college, it works really well, and a lot of those students are adult learners. So probably 40% at many community colleges, especially once you're talking about developmental or remedial math, are adults coming back to school. I will say the one thing we're using this for is in the community college work, there's a type of stigma that's involved in being remedial math. So you're 40, but then you're taking 8th grade math in many cases. And then you're taking it also with 18-year-olds. So what does that person think about the motivation of the 18-year-old? Maybe this person couldn't get their act together. So what we're thinking of is helping small groups in community college remedial classes to talk about their shared purposes allows people to focus on shared goals rather than on like assumed character flaws in their peers, right? Like, I don't want to be part of this group because I don't want to be like that person. But if it's like, we're all trying to make the world better and we have to get skills to do that, then now we're a team. So that's a hypothesis we have that we're trying to test. Great, I think I'm good.